Hey, how's it going? This is Tom, the Screen King, coming to you live from the, well, kind of recorded from the Tavern of Terror in beautiful downtown Fremont, Ohio. And welcome to the Screen Kingdom. I'm reviving my old YouTube show to talk to you about the stuff horror fans love. Horror, maybe some music. I'll have some fun interviews, tell you what I've been watching, and talk about the things that are near and dear to the horror fan's heart. Hopefully this is the first of many episodes, and let's dive right in. We'll have a cold beer, and let's talk horror. Now, as many of you may know, unless you're sleeping under a rock, one of the most beloved movies, one of the most successful movies in the last few years, and just did a great run in theaters over Halloween. Came back into the theaters for Christmas because it's Christmas themed, the newest movie. Talking about, of course, Damien Leone's Terrifier movie with Terrifier 3 coming out on physical media. And Art the Clown becoming a beloved slasher icon, so to speak. And I enjoy the Terrifier movies for what they are. There's a lot of gore, a lot of violence, and a lot of cool set pieces. A lot of what slasher film fans enjoy, and it's not thinking man's horror, for lack of a better term, but it still is a great series of movies. And with the third movie, they're approaching that wonderful phrase that horror fans love, the horror franchise. Now, what makes a horror franchise? For me, anything over that fourth movie, to me, makes a franchise. Because then it's a property that you can kind of expect more product, more content, whatever you want to call it, more movies to come out, and sometimes series. So who knows? And one of the most beloved horror film horror film franchises is Halloween. I mean, who doesn't love Michael Myers? Who doesn't love John Carpenter's OG 1978 film, landmark of slasher films? Didn't start the slasher genre, but definitely kickstarted it. Kind of a cool sequel in Halloween 2. Definitely has its merits. It stands up well today if you rewatch it. Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, everybody hated when it came out because they were expecting Michael Myers, and they didn't get Michael Myers. They got Tom Atkins, who is just as badass, but as a standalone horror movie, Halloween 3 is really good. I really like it. I've watched it countless times because I think it played about every 5 minutes on HBO when I was a teenager, and it's one of those films, And then, of course, 4 and 5 introduced the career of Danielle Harris, who was a precocious little girl at the time who grew into an incredibly hot actress and talented actress who would revisit the series later. Then they kind of got into the successful formula that I'll talk about in a little bit later when they brought Jamie Lee Curtis back for Halloween H2O, and then Halloween Resurrection, which is just, coolio. That's all I got to say. Halloween 6, the director's cut, is a completely different film. It still is a little out there plot-wise, but very entertaining film. Didn't exactly kill the franchise, but it didn't do it any favors either. Then you had the Rob Zombie reboot. A lot of people hated Rob Zombie's Halloween. They said it was too trashy, too white trashy. They took a lot of the mystery away of Michael Myers. There wasn't really anything supernatural about him anymore. And those people that complained about that got exactly what they deserved with the often shat upon Halloween 2 from Rob Zombie, which I don't think is a bad film. If you rewatch it, there's some really good performances, especially Scout Taylor Compton. Danielle Harris is a tour de force in H2. Brad Dourif is great. It's a really good movie. It's an entertaining movie. There's some violent stuff juxtaposed with some really surreal stuff with the white horse and everything else. I won't get too much into it. You probably know what I'm talking about. And then, of course, excuse me, I needed a drink to talk talk about the recent reboot of the Halloween films, starting with Halloween. I have a mask up here, and then followed by Halloween Kills, and of course Halloween Ends, which they returned to formula. They brought back Jamie Lee Curtis's character. They ignored the entire Halloween universe, ignoring everything but the 1978 OG film. John Carpenter was involved again. Of course, the iconic soundtrack, which is in all the movies. And then they brought a lot of characters back from the original film. They, despite ignoring everything else in the franchise, there were some callbacks, some Easter eggs, if you will, to the earlier films. Even Season of the Witch, which I thought was really cool. And a lot of people complain about Halloween Ends, but I was really entertained by it, and I thought it did a good job of wrapping up the Laurie Strode character and bringing a little bit of closure, a little bit of finality to that series. There's rumors about more movies coming. I hope they don't fuck it up too bad. Who knows? We'll see. Speaking of fucking it up, that moves us on to another beloved franchise, but very uneven, which is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. What can you say about Tobe Hooper's 1974 original? It's a classic of both horror cinema and cinema itself. A very groundbreaking film. Has a reputation of being this gory mess, and there's actually very little on-screen gore in the movie. Superbly shot with the claustrophobic feel of everything. Just some crazy, crazy cinema. And like I said, undeniable classic of genre cinema. Followed up by Tobe Hooper coming back for Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, which featured a psychotic Dennis Hopper. Introduced us to, got us a little more in depth with the Sawyer family, and introduced us to Chop Top, played by the amazing Bill Moseley, who went on to do all kinds of genre stuff and is just a beloved actor and an all-around nice guy. If you've ever met him at a convention, you know what I'm talking about. Texas Chainsaw kind of fell off the rails with Part 3, that really strange movie with Matthew McConaughey and Renee Zellweger, The Next Generation. Then they redid Texas Chainsaw with Jessica Biel, who is wearing the greatest tank top in the history of horror cinema. Brought in R. Lee Ermey, who is just great. It was great in everything that he was in. Rest in peace. He brought a very violent, believable, sick fuck character to the sheriff, Sheriff Hoyt, and that worked extremely well. They followed it up because it made a lot of money and introduced new fans to Leatherface. They followed it up with Texas Chainsaw: The Beginning, to kind of a Leatherface origin story, which I thought was entertaining but a little over the top. It was kind of like it was during the height of torture porn when this came out, the torture porn genre, with the Hostel films and Eli Roth doing stuff like that, and a lot of the more extreme Japanese horror coming out. And I don't know if they just tried to fit in there. A lot of it is just offensive for the sake of offensiveness, if that makes sense. I didn't dislike the movie, but it's kind of a take it or leave it for me. It's kind of meh. They followed it up with a 3D version, another reboot, and then the one that went directly to streaming. That was kind of a direct sequel to the original, which I thought wasn't a bad film. It wasn't a completely fresh take, but it wasn't stale either, and I thought it did pretty well. And I'm sure there's probably another Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie in the works because, hey, Leatherface is money, whether you like it or not, and somebody's going to milk that cash cow until somebody finally takes it to the slaughterhouse. And, as long as somebody's paying for the rights, I guess they have every right to make a Texas Chainsaw movie. But for me, the first two is, and I'm a purist. What can I say? One moment. That's good. Anyway, that brings us to another beloved franchise. This started with a very popular movie, moved on to a very popular sequel, and again they were kind of keeping that formula, but coming up with new ways to present it. And I'm talking, of course, of Child's Play, the Chucky films. And they kept that authenticity, that secret to success by bringing Brad Riff back, of course, to voice Chucky through everything. Jennifer Tilly, when she was introduced as the Tiffany character, she's came back a few times. They've had a lot of successful movies in that series, and all of them are a lot of fun. They even did the TV series, which I thought was very well done and kind of a more modern take on things, and introduced Chucky to a new generation of somebody. Well, not introduced him because kids probably already knew about Chucky because there's been so much fucking merchandise, but it brought Chucky a little more current, made him a little more social media valid or whatever, by the teenage protagonists and the series, which I thought was really well done, and I was surprised how much I enjoyed it. So definitely check that out. Which brings us to a couple of the more modern ones that I'll touch upon a little bit as far as horror franchises, which is of course Scream, the original Wes Craven film. Everybody said, oh, it's a shot in the arm to the horror genre. And granted, there was a lot of crap during that period, and there was a lot of films that were just... the only time you were finding anything really original at that point was if you went with direct-to-video horror. So I do think Scream was a little... I was quite an adult when those movies came out, when that franchise started. So while I appreciate the content, it's not something I grew up on. And I know there's a whole generation of people that did grow up on Scream. And Scream, again, did that formula. They brought back Neve Campbell and Courtney Cox and David Arquette when they could afford them. Gave them something fresh to do. And kind of were the gatekeeper characters to the new school kids that were being terrified by Ghostface. There's a lot of fucking merchandise with Scream, too. But they've done a great job of keeping that fresh, changing the setting a little bit, of course changing the characters with those peripheral legacy characters coming back, like I said, the Neve Campbell when they could afford her, and Courtney Cox, and of course David Arquette is not coming back, spoiler alert. But it's interesting to see what they've done with Scream, and they do manage to make that fresh. They make it slick, and they make it easily digestible for the casual horror fan, which I think is great, because I don't think horror is something that horror fandom is very gatekeeperish sometimes, and I don't think that's cool. And we're going to talk about that in a later episode. But let's move on. Saw is another franchise, which I think they kind of lost their way a little bit on that, because that became too formulaic. They kept following the same formula film after film after film, bringing back Jigsaw. There's a few characters that come back and move in and out of that universe. Saw is a franchise that, while I love the first few films, just did not hold my interest in later films. For whatever reason, maybe that's just me personally. I do own them all because I'm a completist nerd when it comes to collecting movies, but Saw is another, maybe I need to fall down that rabbit hole again and rewatch all of those. If I could ever find a weekend to do it, I might do that. Maybe it'll bring a new appreciation to some of the films that maybe I didn't like. Because sometimes when you come back with a fresh set of eyes, a little different perspective, give it a few years to digest and then come back to it, you may like it. Like I said, H2, Rob Zombie's H2 was one of those films for me. And speaking of one of those films, my favorite horror franchise of all time, of course, is Friday the 13th, The Adventures of Jason and Camp Crystal Lake. And again, that's something that kind of, first four movies for me are classics. I did enjoy 5. Part 6 was kind of a return to form, and it was that burgeoning short attention span, loud, over-the-top MTV generation kind of film. Alice Cooper was involved. So 6 really did it for me. I did like Jason Takes Manhattan. That was a pretty decent film. Jason Goes to Hell is a mess. Jason X, I think, is a very fun film. The remake I did not like. That was almost the first time I ever walked out of a movie at the cinema, I was kind of excited for it, and then I wasn't. And Platinum Dunes, I thought, screwed the fucking pooch on that at first. Upon revisiting, and I just watched it recently because, like I said, I'm a completist nerd, so I grabbed a limited edition Arrow 4K of it, and it's starting to kind of grow on me. But Friday the 13th, as far as I'm concerned, is one of my favorite franchises. Even Jason in Space and Jason X is a lot of fun. And like I said, they stayed to the formula. They kept bringing Jason back. They always had a connection to Camp Crystal Lake. Things got silly. There's a little bit of creative asphyxia, for lack of a better term, in some of the later films. But still a fun watch. Like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I revisited on a Friday the 13th around November. I revisited the entire series. I loaded up on coffee, beer, and snacks, and I watched the entire series back to back to back to back back. And yeah, there's some really fun memories on some of those films, and it just takes you back to it. For me, takes me back into a period of time where I was. You have memories attached to that. There's certain songs that do that, certain movies that do that. For Friday the 13th, that there's certain films in there, in that franchise that just do it for me. The definitive box set from Scream Factory. I don't think anybody's gonna secure the rights to do something like that again, unless Scream Factory does a 4K. I don't know if I'll double dip on that, but I do have the first 4 movies on 4K now, just because, I need those. So. So Friday the 13th really does it for me. Like I said, there's peripheral characters they bring back. There's always that connection to Captain Crystal Lake. There's the Tommy Jarvis thing, that storyline. Mrs. Voorhees, things like that. So I really enjoy that. Which brings us to another slasher that should probably go under Mount Rushmore of horror, which is Nightmare on Elm Street. The Wes Craven original is classic. You can't say anything. I mean, violent and gorier than you probably remember. Give it a rewatch, and you might be surprised. Part 2, I really enjoyed. I really, as a teenager, identified with Mark Patton's character, and I'm sure I probably noticed the gay subtext of that movie, but I don't remember noticing it. And if I did, it wasn't that big of a deal. But when I was a teenager, I think that thing played on. I think it played on HBO like every 5 minutes. So I think I've probably watched that movie 50 or 60 times easily. If you popped it in right now, I would annoy you with how much I read along with the dialogue. And of course, Dream Warriors kind of blew up that franchise and brought so many more fans to that franchise. And then, of course, the Dream Master, the Dream Child, Freddy's Dead, where Freddy kind of became a caricature, and maybe some of that menace, maybe some of that threat from that character was softened because of all the one-liners and the comedic elements of that. And Wes Craven, of course, followed that formula, man, and brought it full circle and breathed a lot of fresh life into that franchise with the last film that he was involved in, which was Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which they brought back Heather Langenkamp, of course, Robert Englund, and John Saxon, and things like that. And then the remake, which I don't think is a bad film. A lot of people bag on it, but to me, Jackie Earle Haley is a very capable actor. Kelly Leak from the Bad News Bears, but and he was great as Rorschach in Watchmen, but he does a great job of Freddy Krueger, and it's not his fault, genre fans, that he's not Robert Englund. It's not his fault that he's not Robert Englund. He went into that role and didn't try to copy Robert Englund, didn't try to do that version of Freddy. And trust me, you all would have been up in arms if he had. So I think that remake deserves a break, deserves a rewatch. A lot of people complain, oh, they made Freddy Krueger a child molester. Well, in the original movies, he killed kids in a boiler room, lured them to a boiler room and killed them. I think it was implied that he was a chomo. So for them to bring that to the forefront on the remake, it makes sense. I mean, come on. It was implied in the movies. You can't tell me it wasn't, right? Another one of my beloved franchises, Hellraiser. Now, Hellraiser is a weird animal for me because the first two films are two of my favorite films of all time, hands down. And I think, and I'm sure some fan has done it and put out a bootleg Blu-ray of it. If you edited those two into one film, it would be epic as hell, and it would hold your attention for 4 hours. Horny as fuck, S&M as fuck. The later sequels, I think on Hellraiser 3 Hell on Earth, they tried to turn Pinhead into Freddy Krueger. They introduced some new Cenobites that quite didn't work. Hellraiser 4, I think, is a really good film, backstory film. It only took Pinhead 4 movies to get to space. It took Jason 10. But, and for those of you keeping score at home, and I don't think 4 is a bad film. Arrow Video put out the Scarlet Box, which had the first 3 films, and then the Quartet of Torment. Yes, because I just got that on 4K, and that has the first 4 films, and that should tell you everything you need to know about that franchise. Later movies like Hellseeker and things like that kind of strike me as, okay, we made a movie. Let's make it a Hellraiser movie. Let's go shoot some content with Doug Bradley, shoehorn some Pinhead segments in there, and we'll call it a Hellraiser movie. That's kind of how those films make me feel. The later movies is, they changed Pinhead. Doug Bradley wasn't playing him anymore, and those films aren't terrible, but to me it just doesn't feel authentic. And I know I just talked about Jackie Earle Haley playing Freddy Krueger, but for me, Pinhead will always be Doug Bradley, and there's some merit to the later films. And then they did a remake, which I thought was fantastic. A lot of people thought it was too woke, too horny, not horny enough. They changed the Cenobites. It was a little more true to Clive Barker's vision with the Hellbound Heart. I thought the remake was really good. I wish somebody would do a fucking physical media release of that, because I need that on Blu-ray or 4K on a non-bootleg thing. So somebody please do that, because that's one of those movies I need to rewatch a lot. But I really enjoyed the remake, and that was one of those remakes for me that worked, of a beloved franchise for me anyway. And then, that movie still gets a lot of hate, and I'm going to talk about that in a later episode when we talk about toxic horror fandom. But to me, that's a beloved franchise, at least the first 4 films and maybe that remake. Another beloved franchise that, again, followed that formula that makes a successful franchise is Phantasm. Don Coscarelli's original. As corny as it can be in parts, The Fly, I'm Looking at You, is one of my favorite movies, one of my favorite franchises. Very uneven, but when you bring Reggie Bannister back and give him all kinds of crazy guns and that CUDA, that to me, that's it. The Phantasm movies, no matter how hokey some of the sequels can get, feel like home to me. And that's something that is on that borderline of a franchise, because there's only 5 films in it. Ravager being the last one, which was kind of a return to the form, and works on some levels it doesn't, but that's one of those movies that, man, you can't fucking remake that, because who's going to play Angus Scrimm? Who's going to play the tall man? And Angus Scrimm is not with us anymore, and I don't think anybody can ever touch that character again with that much subtle menace, and just the guy walks into a room and you're instantly terrified. And I don't think anybody can do that as effectively. There's 2 people that I said if they ever make a movie about their lives, nobody could play them, and that's Angus Scrimm and Barbara Steele. Because those are 2 people that are just, they're one of a kind. When they made them, they don't make them like that anymore, and they don't let them make them like that anymore. But as far as franchises, those are the main ones. And yeah, there's a lot of them. And if you think of something that I forgot, or if you think of something that you think is a franchise, definitely tell me in the comments. I haven't even touched on the George Romero zombie movies, There's John Carpenter's Apocalypse trilogy, which isn't really a franchise, but you got The Thing, and you got Prince of Darkness, and you got In the Mouth of Madness. Dario Argento's Animal trilogy, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, Four Flies on Grey Velvet, The Cat o' Nine Tails. Of course, I'm completely missing the Return of the Living Dead franchise. Hatchet, I think you could make an argument that that's a franchise. The Victor Crowley saga. I mean, you got 1, 2, 3, and then Victor Crowley, which Adam Green does great job with those, and those are a lot of fun and a lot of fun to marathon those films. And I think that's what makes a strong franchise. And if you're going to sit down on a weekend and say, okay, I own all these on physical media, I'm going to grab some beers, some snacks, maybe a good friend, maybe snuggle up with your significant other, and we're going to marathon these movies, right? We're going to watch them all, see how many we can get through. And I think that's what makes a great franchise, and I think that's why some of these franchises stand the test of time, especially like your Halloweens, your Nightmare on Elm Streets, your Friday the 13th. Once you get into those later films where they start to maybe fall off a little bit quality wise, and it's all about commerce. They made these movies, they made all these sequels because the previous one made money. And if it's just like pop music, if there's a hit, let's mine that, let's milk that cash cow till it plays out, and make as much coin off it as we can. And that's, as beloved as they are, that's what drives a lot of these horror franchises. It's all about commerce. I mean, it may have started with art, but by the time you get to part 5 or 6, it's all about commerce. It's all about selling Blu-rays, streaming, or tickets at the cinema for anything that doesn't get a theatrical release nowadays. And like I said, there's a lot that I'm probably forgetting. There's a lot that I'm overlooking that you might think is a franchise that isn't. Reanimator only went 3 films. To me, that's not a franchise, but those are 3 films that I fucking love. Evil Dead, very smart way to do that franchise. They did the first 3 films, Evil Dead, Evil Dead 2, Dead by Dawn, and then Army of Darkness with Bruce Campbell. They came back and did the series that everybody was screaming for, that fans wanted forever, and they gave them exactly what they wanted with Ash vs. Evil Dead, which I think wrapped up when it should have. And then, of course, Evil Dead Rise, and then the Evil Dead remake or reboot, Evil Dead Rise. And if you look at those, they kind of exist in the same universe. So yeah, that is a franchise too. And I'm glad they didn't do the crossover films that they threatened, like Ash versus Jason versus Freddy. Jason versus Freddy was a very fun film, a crossover for 2 franchises. But when you throw Ash in the mix, I don't think that would work. In comic book form, yeah. Not in cinema form. But like I said, let me know what horror franchises you love. Let me know something that you think is a franchise that I might have missed. And hey, let's look out for the new franchises like Terrifier. Let's see what comes on. Are we going to see Terrifier 5 and 6? Who knows? Maybe. My only advice would be, if you do 5 and 6, 4, 5, and 6, keep it a little shorter. Because I thought Terrifier 2, while quality film, was much too long. Terrifier 3 borderlined on that, but I'm sure they wanted to get their entire vision on the screen. I've never met Damien Leone. I know people that have. They say he's very passionate about what he does, and he's very driven and very knowledgeable about what he's doing. So while I think that he has a lightning in a bottle with this series, I don't think he's milking it for cash yet. It will get to that point, trust me, because this is, in the end, it's all about commerce, but we can still hope for a lot of fun from this and other franchises. So like I said, in the comments, let me know what you think. If I'm wrong, tell me. If I have an opinion that might, cross yours, let me know. And if I forgot anything, or if I glossed over whenever anything too quick, you let me know. And let's have some discourse about this. Coming up is an interview with filmmaker, podcaster, and author Jim Towns, which I think you're going to find real entertaining. And thanks for stopping by the Scream Kingdom. Okay, tonight in the Tavern of Terror on the Scream Kingdom, let's not forget the title. I have director, author, podcaster, and jack of all trades as far as the horror genre and entertainment goes. His name is a few letters off of the hardest working man in show business, soul brother number one. But we'll just call him the hardest working man in indie horror, my man, Jim Towns. How are you, Jim?
I'm good, man. Thank you. It's back. Good to be back on the Scream Kingdom in the tavern.
Yes, and
Been a bit.
I'm actually just finishing up a gnarly hotep amber ale
Oh, okay.
for my own
One of yours,
recipe.
right?
Yes, absolutely.
Nice. And it's in a Smog City glass, I see.
Sin City Brewing Company and
Sin City, that's what it's our Vegas one, right? Yeah.
recently resurrected Sin City Brewing Company. They were a victim of
Oh,
COVID.
that's
They're
good.
back
Good to
now,
know.
though.
Good to know. I'm having a red ale in my Iron Maiden Trooper glass.
Nice, nice.
Uh, this is a local brewery. It's called Absolution. They're LA based, and this is their Cardinal Sin red ale.
I'm actually going to pop
It's
open a
quite good.
local one from Bowling Green, Ohio, Juniper Brewing Company. This is their Thriller.
Hmm,
As you can see, it's got all the
here you
horror
go.
icons on the can.
Oh, that's awesome.
I'll pop that in
We
while
should be
we're
getting
talking
paid for this
about.
promotion. What's going on, right?
No, I wish somebody would give me free beer.
Yeah, or at least they could pay us in beer, right? I'd accept that. That's valid.
Exactly. Wow, that is really carbonated. Anyway, let's get into what we're going to talk about here. Now, I've seen quite a few of your movies. I've seen Stiff. I've seen Prometheus Triumphant, the ultra sexy House of Bad, and then State of Desolation, aka End Times. They changed the title on it. I actually like the original title better, but who am I?
Me
That's out of
too.
my pay grade. But and then the
The people that
upcoming
paid us a bunch of money for it, like the other title, so we went with that one.
The Beast Inside. What can you tell us about that?
Yes. We shot it in 2021 and edited through 2022. Pandemic kind of slows everything down and everything, so it took a bit, but I reunited with my collaborator from House of Bad, as well as the documentary Bill Murray Experience, Sadie Katz. Uh, she's a kind of a name in the horror scene as well, obviously. And she and I always had productive, conversations and collaborations
Good
together.
collaborative
So
relationship, yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So she just had, she was interested in moving into producing world as well as acting, kind of being more in control of her own content as a woman, which I am absolutely supportive of. So she reached out to me with a kind of an idea for something, and I said, let's run with that, and we put it together extremely fast. Within, I think, from the time I started writing the script to the time we were shooting was 3 months or something like that. It was incredible. Um, Next thing you know, we're on set in a incredibly small motel room in LA during COVID with like 19 people, which is just everyone was vaxxed. We had masks. We were very, very safe. We had no uh, uh, disease spread or anything like that within the well, not COVID at least, within
I was gonna say, I think I've been to that
the
convention.
on the set and everything. And we shot it super quick, like yeah, right. Yeah. Shot it super quick. We spent like 4 or 5 days in that one motel room alone. The large part of the movie takes place in this one kind of thing. So it's great. It's kind of a almost like a set. Sadie's main co-star was Vernon Wells, who we all know from The Road Warrior and Commando and Weird Science. It was great to get to work with Vernon for the first time. I hadn't met him before. I didn't know what to, but also taking very seriously due reverence, and he was just a fantastic guy to said. The only problem with Vernon was in between camera setups, I'd started asking him questions about what it was like working on Road Warrior, and he'd start telling me the answer, but then the camera would be ready, and my AD would be like, "We're ready to go." It's like, no, he's telling me about doing the transit from the one car to the other without safety cables or anything. Yeah, it was great. It was really cool. It was great
That's
working with the
it.
dude.
There's a story that Adam Green told one time about the first time I'm meeting Kane Hodder as far as working on a project together, and he was asking people, should I take stuff for him to sign or so
Yeah, possibly not. Yeah, yeah. I really thought about having Vernon sign my Road Warrior DVD, Blu-ray, or whatever, but yeah, I decided I shouldn't.
Well, at least you can say
You
that
can
you've worked
you
with
can
him, right?
you can tap out the fanboy thing a little bit too much.
Speaking of fanboying, I'm a fan of your work, obviously. Where can we see the Beast
Thank you.
Inside?
Beast Inside is currently available to rent on Amazon, Apple, Fandango. Like you can rent movies on Fandango now, which I guess I knew that, but that's still like a surprise to me. Um, and probably a few other things if you check it out. Just look up The Beast Inside. Um, it's going to be like video on demand for a couple months probably, and then I'm sure it'll drop on one of the streaming networks, one of the streaming networks right after that. But if you can rent it right now, that really helps us out. It appreciates it, and it helps us when the time comes for the distributor to take it over to streaming. We get a better deal out of that. Uncorked Entertainment is putting it out, and I know Keith a little bit. He's a good dude and everything, so I really appreciate them picking it up.
That kind of segues nice into my next question. What do you think is one of the biggest challenges for indie filmmakers these days? I mean, obviously there's a mechanism there to self-distribute,
Yeah.
but is that another hat that you don't want to put on that takes away from the creative process? Because I mean, the dynamic has changed, the landscape has changed. I mean, you don't have like the '80s where you had your Afghan embassies, your Concords, your
Yeah.
Empire Pictures, your Vestron Video. Is distribution the biggest hurdle, or what is?
I think the hurdles come on both ends. It's a bit of a catch-22 where if you don't have something set up with it where you have distribution set up in place, it's harder to raise the funds required to do your movie. Obviously, anytime you're working with like an indie scene with limited budgets, you're constrained by the budget, so your vision has to get compromised to some degree. There's things you want to do that you're just not going to be able to do. There's locations you want to film at, actors you want to have that you just can't afford those things. So what you end up is like you had the goal, and then you have the reality of what you end up holding in your hand at the end of the process of post and everything. So then you go into this again, like you said, this distribution world where if you don't have that set up ahead of time, now you're hunting around. Um, I'm fortunate I'm to a point where honestly, like most of my stuff is coming out through distribution companies. End Times came out through The Asylum, our good friends who brought you Sharknado and so many other great movies. Which people are like, this is a very serious film for Asylum to put out. We're like, yeah, it was, but they seem to dig it.
I thought so as
Um,
well when I reviewed it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But they did a great job with it. It sounds awesome and everything. I was watching it streaming. Um, uh, but anyway, so luckily that I did a indie film called Killer X recently. It's a martial arts film I directed, and it just came out, and it's now available on Tubi TV. And we actually went straight to an aggregator for that. We decided to not do the streaming thing. Um, Michael Kesey, aka Mohammed Kesey, is in that. The guy from Kickboxer, Tong Po. And I got to work with that guy, which was really cool. So it's a trade-off. You work with a distributor, and you have to find a distributor you can trust because I've worked with distributors that were not trustworthy on House of Bad, and uh, um, and we caught them doing stuff, and it was tricky to make sure we were getting paid the amount of money we were supposed to be getting paid. Um, that distributor's no longer in business anyway, so we're fine there. And House of Bad, by the way, is available now. Now we are reselling it to and looking for a new distributor to re-release it at this point because we're free of that original contract. Um, but yeah, it's a tricky minefield where you're going to trade off. You might get a little more percentage of the back end if you go straight through an aggregator or actually just distribute yourself. But the problem is you're going to spend a lot more time, you know, equity getting that film out there yourself. So the question is like, what's your time worth? Um, I guess I'm to a point at this point where I value my time is valuable enough that I'm not going to spend that amount of time trying to do it and doing all the because what you really get with distributors, you get promote, they do PR, they promote it, hopefully. They make people aware because the thing I learned with my first film, Prometheus, when it came out is your Prometheus on DVD was available everywhere on at Walmart, everything like that. But if nobody knows it's available,
Yeah.
you're not gonna, and this is the days before social media, you're not going to make the money. Like it has to be available and people have to know available. So you have to get press out there. You have to P&R and all that stuff. So
So at
yeah,
some point, it's just like we'll get the deliverable.
it's just a tricky minefield. No matter which way you go is the answer to
Yeah.
that question, I guess.
So, I mean, you're at a point where at a certain project, you can just say, well, I'll get my deliverables together, send them off, and I can sit back and concentrate on my next project.
And that's the other thing too is when you work the way I do, the structure I'm trying to create is that I have a movie in the process of coming out while I'm actively either shooting the next one or at least in pre-production on the next one. I have to leapfrog because I don't make that much money as much as like a big studio director would. So I have to do this faster than that, which means 1, 2 movies a year at this point, and that's what I've been kind of doing. So I want to be spending that time focused on the next thing while I
Yeah, and I get that. Yeah.
while the editing software can do your closed captionings by almost by itself at some point. So things have gotten easier. Technology's made it a lot easier.
You're one of those filmmakers that I can appreciate because you wear your influences on your sleeve as opposed to saying, well, I'm just this artist and I'm completely independent. And but you have no problem
No,
talking about your
no, no,
influences.
no, no. Dracula's daughter playing in the background behind me here.
Which brings me into the Borgo Pass Horror podcast. I'm a huge fan of that.
Yeah,
Um, I
thank
think
you.
you and Livio, for your most frequent guest host, do a great
Yes.
job. And what I think you bring to and if anybody is watching this and hasn't checked out the Borgo Pass Horror podcast, definitely do it. Nobody goes more in depth on Universal, RKO, and the Poverty Row studios than Jim and the frequent Livio Marino. But my biggest thing on that is that you approach it from a fan's perspective, but you don't, I guess, put your own biases on it. Because myself, I'm a famous Monsters Fangoria kid. So growing up, when I read something written about Universal horror films,
Yeah.
9 times out of 10 it was Tom Weaver, who's a very
Yeah.
knowledgeable guy, very talented writer. But for some reason, he has is whenever came around to Lugosi, he always took that opportunity to drag Lugosi about he's a ham, he was a talentless actor,
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
couldn't hold a candle to Karloff and things like that. And that for me took me out of it a
That's
little bit
interesting. Right.
because I'm a huge Lugosi fan. Um, Although
Yes.
you corrected me on my favorite Hungarian a couple weeks ago, but still,
That's right. That's right. I mean,
that's one thing that I appreciate about the Borgo
it wasn't
Pass.
Hungary when he was born there. Technically, it's Hungary now. So anyway,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think. But yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, Liv and I both approach it as Lugosi files to begin with. I mean, I think Lugosi is sort of the orbit around which this all sort of happened for me to begin with. And Livio's a huge Lon Chaney Jr. fan too, and he's a very knowledgeable about when it comes to all his films. So yeah, to me, it's not about who's better and who's worse. And it's also just not about. It's about celebrating the awesomeness of these movies, and you know, yeah, yes, they're 60, 70, 80, 90 years, some of them old, some of them now. So to me, it's about going back and looking at the films as archival pieces from the era they were made. And I'm interested in the context. It's more like I come at it more like from a David J. Skal approach, who we just lost at the beginning of this of last year. We're
Hmm.
coming up on the anniversary of him dying. I was really inspired by his writing and the seriousness and the academicness that by which he took the subject of classic horror. And that's what I've striven to do in the thing is to make something, dare I say, educational while it's being entertaining at the same time. Um, we've had one of our regular visitors on the show is Greg Mank, who's written a ton about stuff about Lugosi and Karloff and their supposed competitiveness, but also just these two talented actors who both sort of encapsulate the genre of classic horror for us. we're 100 episodes into the thing, and as you said, like we'll take an hour-long film and talk about it for 2.5 hours ad nauseum. So it's a
Like you just
show
did
for fans of the genre.
like you just did with Jekyll or Abbott and Costello. I'm actually
Frank
caught up now.
Costello,
Yeah.
meet Frankenstein. Yeah, we did.
Yes.
It's a two-part. Yeah, it's like a 3 hours on Abbott and Costello meet
I just
Frankenstein. It's
finished
hilarious,
that
but
one.
that
So
was a seminal movie for a lot of us. That was, we say, it's like the gateway drug that got a lot of us when we were our age, slightly before home video was available, got us into watching these movies because that was what was on TV a lot, that one movie. So yeah, that was a big deal for me to finally get to talk about that film, and I held off on it until episode 100. I thought it was really fun to do.
yeah, I had my fingers crossed because my favorite Universal horror is Creature from the Black Lagoon. So I had
Oh
I was patiently awaiting for that episode, and I thought you guys did
yeah,
great. You did
finally got to
a
have it.
great Rico Browning tribute
Thanks.
that I thought
Yes,
was
yeah.
nice.
Who else? We also lost.
Now
Yeah,
with the podcast,
yeah, really cool. I mean,
is it important to have that type of creative outlet between movies as far
hmm
as doing the podcast? Because
yeah,
I mean, you put a lot into
yeah,
doing the podcast. I mean,
yeah.
it's no joke.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it started off more as there's a really good podcast called Monsters and Drinks that some friends of ours do, and it's a great podcast. You should listen to it. Borgo Pass started off a little bit more like that, where it was almost like two, because I had another co-host, Scott Kelly, who started it with me for the
Yeah,
first
he just
year,
came back for an
and it was
episode.
kind of like, yeah, yeah, the Boston guy, and
Yeah.
um, we're coming up on the fourth anniversary of on January 16th of our first episode on Dracula 31. And it was a little bit more of two guys having some drinks and rapping about classic horror. Um, and I was fun like that. But then when he decided to move on and do other things, and I took over the podcast, yeah, I kind of wanted to make it a little bit more serious. It's as what to your question about that, like, I'm very fortunate and I get to do uh, sort of my passion as my career. I get to make movies and I get to write and I get to do all these things. The part of the caveat to that is that it's a very, very, very competitive business. There are plenty of people out there who want to be doing what I'm doing, who think they can do it better than I am, and possibly they can, and they might have more resources. So you have to push to really excel. You have to push to really do, put all you got into it. The podcast gives me a chance to uh, just sort of engage in a passion of mine in a slightly less, yes, I take it seriously, but it's also a lot more casual. It's a lot more fun. It is just a big conversation I have with somebody about something we both really love. And it's a way for me to pay back. Um, I grew up in the 80s like you, and I grew up watching Texas Chainsaw and Nightmare on Elm Street and Jason and everything. And I love those movies, but I was also the weird kid who was also like really into like Abbott and Costello, me Frankenstein, which none of my friends were. All my horror friends were just like, "What is this?" Um, it's fun to just re-embrace that kid a little bit in doing the podcast.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, my gateway drug, I guess, to horror was Saturday afternoons. WUAB Channel 43 out of Cleveland had an
Nice.
afternoon monster thing on Sundays. Superhost, guy dressed up in a
Mm,
Superman costume with a big rubber red nose on, and he would show all the old Hammer horror movies and everything. And I mean, that's kind of where I fell in love with Ingrid Pitt.
yeah.
That's I remember one movie that really stuck with me was Frankenstein and Monster from Hell, which was
Yeah.
David Prowse, who went on to play Darth Vader, who, in Star
Also,
Wars, was a
yeah.
big part of my formative years. And
Yeah.
but I think the great thing about Borgo Pass, and full disclosure, I've listened to every episode now. You've kept me
That's
company
like
on.
that's like 150 hours of stuff you've listened to, by the
There's been
way.
a
The
lot of
average
flights,
is
and I
about
drive a
an hour
lot
and a
for
half. That's
work, so
incredible.
yeah.
Thank you. If we can make your long commutes just a little bit more entertaining, then mission accomplished, man.
Yeah, and throwing back to what you said about, your influences, and I enjoy how you sometimes bring that filmmaker's perspective into maybe some technical aspects we haven't noticed, or
Yeah.
some performance aspects we haven't noticed. Like I just watched Dracula on 4K the other night for the first time, partially inspired by you, and
Right.
I remember in the back of my head, there was some drinks and maybe some other cannabis substances involved, but I remember focusing on watching Lugosi's performance on how you said he never does two things at once, and he moves very deliberately,
Something I've
and
just recently realized. How
how
many of
unsettling
his
that
films have I
was,
watched? Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
that
he
really,
doesn't do
yeah.
two things at once. If he moves to a table and picks up a glass, he walks to the table, stops, and picks up the glass, says a line, and then does it. It's so mannered, and it's
Even opening a
so
door.
much of modern acting is about naturalism, and he's so not natural. But I think that, as I said on that podcast, I think that's what makes you believe that he might possibly be a reanimated corpse walking around hungering for
Absolutely, it's
blood,
very
because he
unsettling.
doesn't behave like a normal human being behaves. It was so everything was structured. And the other part is because of all his back injuries, I think he has this ridiculously straight, erect carriage that a lot of humans don't have. It's almost like he's in a corset or something like that. Yeah. Because I think he had to hold his back very carefully because he was injured in World War One very badly.
Now, the piece that I recorded to segue into this interview was about franchise horror and what
Mhm.
constitutes a franchise. And in my opinion, I would say anything past part four would be a franchise. Um,
Okay. Yeah.
and that being said, post say 1970, what's Jim Townsend's go-to franchise as far as horror?
Oh, post 1970. What's my go-to franchise as far as horror? Uh, um,
By the way, in light of recent
I like
movies,
the Tremor
I'm going to
series.
open a mustacheless Nosferatu there.
Nice. I love Mustache-less Nosferatu. I, Stoker describes Dracula in the book as having
Absolutely.
a long white mustache. The mustache is not, and I know you know that, but I just want to say it out loud for the sake of anybody listening. The mustache is not without precedent, is all I'm going to say. Yes, he looks a little bit like Peter Stormare on a bender, but having said that, yeah. Um, I think, and I'll just say, I watched the movie. I love the new Nosferatu right there. I think it's a miracle a film that artistic actually got made by a semi-major studio. Um,
And a wide release.
I think, and why release? Yeah, absolutely. And I think as a filmmaker, what I'll say, I'll bring my filmmaker perspective to it, like I do the podcast, is if you're doing something as iconic and not as Nosferatu, you have two choices. You either run towards the Marnell film with Max Schreck, or you move away from it. And I think he did this perfect balancing act of honoring the vibe and timbre and look and mood of the original while managing to be visually original and present us with something that we have not seen. I was not totally prepared to see Nosferatu Wiener in the movie, but there you go. Okay. It's a choice. It's a valid choice. Eggers never shies away from nudity in his films, I've noticed, which is something I don't either in my movies. And I think it's a weird trend that I'm noticing that a lot of younger viewers seem very uncomfortable with anything intimate or any kind of nudity or anything like that in movies. I feel like, not, first of all, it's just a natural thing. We're all like that under our clothes anyway. And at some point, if you follow someone's story enough, you're going to eventually see them without whatever. Um, but I also like the idea that like it just triggers some of these people too. So I'm going
Well,
to keep doing it in my
and vampires by nature, by nature,
yeah
obviously they're fictional.
by
But it's
unnature.
it's very sexual, the lore. And
Mm,
while that wasn't in Murnau's movie,
yes.
it's a symptom of the times. I mean,
I thought Lily Rose Depp was amazing. I thought she was just
fantastic.
like
Yoga Hosers just
like you
wasn't.
just
Yeah.
can't take her right. Yeah.
But back to my question, your
Um.
favorite franchise, horror franchise?
Yeah. Oh yeah. 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 I do like the Tremors series. I love Tremors. First of all, the first one is just one of my go-tos. But I think the sequels have just done this whole wonderful thing where they've gotten more and more ludicrous and then sort of circled back and gotten a little more serious again and stuff like that. I've been lucky enough to actually meet Michael Gross once or twice. He's a hell of a nice guy, and it's really fun seeing him have this whole like side career just making these movies every once in a while and they go to now they film in like South Africa and stuff. It's crazy, but yeah. Let's see that. I'm looking at my collection. I don't know. Yeah, about franchises are tough. I mean, they really get tired after a while.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm a huge Friday the 13th fan, and I'll be the first one
yeah,
to admit that the later movies in that kind of suffered from a bit of creative asphyxia.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. Um, I think Texas Chainsaws had an interesting thing where instead of like having sequels, they just keep remaking it every couple
Yeah.
years. But but I like I'm a big fan, and I personally know a little bit some of those directors. Marcus Nispel is fantastic. I mean, say what you want
Absolutely.
about
Yeah.
the films themselves. He's an amazing gifted guy. If you haven't seen Pathfinder, holy crap, watch Pathfinder. It's Native Americans fighting Vikings. It's badass as shit. Um, uh, and then Adam Marcus just did he do Leatherface or did he do Texas Chainsaw 3D?
I thought he did
He did one of
Leatherface.
them. Anyway,
Yeah.
Adam's a great guy. Adam's a super nice guy. I know Adam a little bit. Shout out to him. Yeah, I think that's fun. And I do think the strength of a character or an idea is how many different ways it can be reinvented and re-visualized.
Well, what kind of
Um, I guess my number one maybe would be Alien. I think the Alien franchise has been really fascinating. I I, I love Genet is I haven't seen the new one yet. I haven't seen Romulus, but then I thought it was interesting when really just kind of thing too. I mean, the strength of that very simple idea of a character of these acid-blooded predator. Speaking of predator, I loved Prey. Prey was awesome.
Yeah, I just picked up Romulus on Blu-ray the other day, so me being the completest nerd I am.
Okay, I got to check it out. Yeah, I'm too busy watching, House of Frankenstein and making notes for like 6 hours on it. I sometimes don't have a lot of time to watch new things at the point.
Yeah, I
The
know.
podcast does take its time.
I have a stack of movies about this high to review, and then I always find myself watching an old movie because of I listened to you talking about it. So I blame you.
I thank you. I have a thing I call the RoboCop paradigm, and it, I'm going to watch this new thing, and I don't I haven't seen. And about 8 or 10 minutes in, I'll ask myself, would I rather be watching this for the first time, or would I rather be watching RoboCop for the 55th time? And surprisingly, a lot of the times it comes up RoboCop because talk about just the most entertaining, hilarious, outrageous, and yet brilliant, subtle social commentary of a movie. Yeah. So sometimes I end up watching RoboCop a lot.
I do the same thing with Toxic Avenger. So, well,
Fair enough.
anyways, it's been a
I'm going.
pleasure.
Okay. I hope you don't kick me off the podcast. I'm going into an IPA.
Well, technically, this is a double IPA, so
I know you're not a fan, but I'm going in.
nice.
Okay. Well, there you go.
So, what do you have coming up for us?
And it's in my vintage 1970. Let's see. I am. I shot a very personal kind of little film this summer called Mandromeda. I wanted to go back and do another black and white film. My first film Prometheus Triumph was black and white. I wanted to go back and do another black and white film. I had this idea about a movie. I kind of want to step outside of genre a little bit. It's a little bit of a sci-fi movie, but it's mostly just kind of a character piece, kind of a drama, and it's kind of a tribute to the indie movies. Kevin Smith was doing Dogma. You had Night on Earth. You had all these indie guys were coming in and making these movies. So it's about it's called Mandromeda. It's about three rideshare drivers in LA on the last 2 or 3 days of the Earth before the Andromeda Galaxy crashes into the Milky Way and destroys us all. And it's really just all these different funny little people around having different conversations about our existence and stuff. And it's really just about I want it's a movie about every single character in the movie is dealing with the fact that they know they're going to die within the next 48 hours. And it's about how all these different people process this because any movie you want to look at its very core, I think almost every story we tell is a way of for us to deal with the fact that we all know that at some point we won't be here anymore. And years, and we've been dealing with this kind of thing too. And I wanted to strip the metaphor away from that and do something a little more straightforward and honest and talk about that. So that we're in post on that ensemble piece. I got to bring back all these actors I've worked with on all these different, on, House of Bad and End Times and Possession of Anne and stuff. I got to sort of bring everyone back in just to show up for a scene. And Devney Pin showed up and did a scene. Monique Parent did a bit. So many cool actors. I worked with people I did Shakespeare in high school with and stuff. It was such a cool experience. So that's done. Just about we're doing color, sound, special effects, score, and everything like that coming up. And then I'm about to start shooting a movie called The Stick Fighter. It's my second action film coming up with a guy named Ed Wedding that I've worked with before. We're doing horror movies. I am really excited to come back and return to do horror pretty soon. Um, both of them very intimate little horror films, like little character pieces, which is kind of what I do anyway. Shooting this summer, and then it looks like in the summer I'm doing Killer X2. We might be shooting in Trinidad for a little bit, so that'll be interesting because the plugs are different. So it's a whole complicated thing.
Well, nice. We'll definitely be on the lookout for all that stuff. And I encourage everybody to listen to the Borgo Pass Horror Podcast, one of the greatest podcasts out there. Something
Thank
that
you.
I never miss an episode of. And definitely, I'm going to be on the lookout for, like I said, I admire your work. And this is probably the closest we're going to get, at least in the foreseeable future, to having a beer together. So cheers, Mr. Towns. Thanks for coming on. And we'll be on the
Possibly
lookout.
not. Possibly not. If Stick Fighter happens, we might be shooting some stuff in Toledo. Get ready.
Nice. 40 minutes.
We'll put you.
Outstanding.
I'll put you in the scene.
Cheers, sir.
Thomas,
Th-
cheers, man. Thank you so much for having me on. Thanks so much for being my pal for so many years here since House of Bad. Yeah, that was when you did reviewed House of Bad, and that's how I think we met
Absolutely.
way back in
Yes.
2011 or 12 or something like that, man.
Yes.
It's been a while, so thank you. I appreciate it. And thanks everybody for listening. I really appreciate it.
Likewise, sir. Thanks.